Well, the Prime Minister will use a speech in front of China's Premier Li Qiang today to declare that while ties are being rebuilt, Australia will not be silent on disputes with Beijing. It's the first visit to Australia by a Chinese Premier in 7 years, and security has been stepped up ahead of high-level talks today.
Anthony Albanese has signalled he will raise difficult issues like military encounters between the two countries and Australians detained in China. Let's go straight to Tom Lowrey at Parliament House. Tom, very good morning to you. So what exactly is planned for the Premier's visit there today?
Yeah, good morning, Michael. Premier Li arrived here in Canberra last night, and we'll get the full Canberra ceremonial welcome later on this morning. Parts of the city have really been transformed for days now. That security has really been elevated around Parliament House in particular. Large steel fences lining some of the major roads around Parliament House, particularly given the large number of protesters expected today. Protesters and supporters both welcoming Premier Li as he arrived in Canberra last night. We will see that ceremonial welcome at the front of Parliament later on this morning before a meeting between senior figures of both the Australian and Chinese governments. Ministers like Defence Minister Richard Marles and Penny Wong, Foreign Minister Penny Wong will be there in that meeting as well, alongside some interesting others. Education Minister Jason Clare, Resources Minister Li Qiang and Agriculture Minister Murray Watt too, which gives you a bit of an indication of what might be on the agenda as these leaders meet. There'll be a state lunch later on this afternoon hosted by the Prime Minister ahead of meetings with the Governor-General and the Leader of the Opposition as well. But one of the most, I suppose, visible elements of this visit by Premier Li will be those large protests we're expecting out the front, alongside also potentially thousands of strong supporters of Premier Li making their presence known as well.
So, Tom, what is the message the Prime Minister is hoping to send during this visit?
Yeah, it's been interesting, the messaging from both sides actually throughout this visit already. We've heard that line from Premier Li that the relationship is back on track between Australia and China, but the Australian government perhaps being a little bit more cautious in its messaging, suggesting that it does still want to discuss some of those points of tension. The Prime Minister will use a speech delivered at that state lunch today to say that it's clear that our nations are making progress in stabilising and rebuilding that crucial dialogue. But it'll go on to say we won't always agree, and the points on which we disagree won't simply disappear if we leave them in silence, clearly indicating there that it's better to have these difficult conversations out loud rather than pretending these tensions simply don't exist. So, Michael, a very significant but also sensitive visit today.
Tom Lowrey at Parliament House in Canberra, thank you.
Former Liberal staffer Bruce Lehrmann is due before a Queensland court this morning to face a committal hearing on rape charges. Reporter Jessica Ross will be at the Toowoomba courthouse for the hearing today and filed this report.
Well, this will be the first time that Bruce Lehrmann appears in this court since he was charged in December 2022. The political staffer who worked in Parliament House for then Defence Minister Linda Reynolds actually grew up here in Toowoomba, which is on the Darling Downs, just a couple of hours' drive west of Brisbane. The case was first mentioned in this court in January last year, but under Queensland law, Mr Lehrmann could not be identified. Those laws have since changed. The 29-year-old has been charged with 2 counts of rape alleged to have occurred in October 2021. He's been excused from attending previous mentions of this matter and so far has not been required to enter a plea, but it is understood he intends to plead not guilty to the charges. Previous hearings have focused on data downloads from the female complainant's mobile phone. At this committal hearing, it's understood Mr Lehrmann's lawyers will cross-examine the complainant in what's expected to be a closed court. However, media organisations have applied to sit in to hear the evidence, but it remains to be seen whether the magistrate will grant that request. This hearing is expected to take several hours, and at the conclusion, the magistrate will then determine if there's sufficient evidence for the case to go to trial in the District Court.
To other news now, a verdict in the murder trial of former Jetstar pilot Greg Lynn could be handed down as soon as this morning as jurors resume deliberations in the Victorian Supreme Court. Mr Lynn has pleaded not guilty to the murders of retirees Russell Hill and Carol Clay in Victoria's High Country in 2020. His lawyers claim the deaths were accidents that Mr Lynn covered up in a panic.
The Gubbi people of the Sunshine Coast region are today expected to gain native title recognition of their traditional lands. The application before the federal court covers more than 365,000 hectares of land spanning Caboolture, Gympie and Noosa. The determination will recognise the Gubbi people's non-exclusive rights to land and waters in the area.
Israel's Prime Minister has criticised plans announced by his country's military for daily tactical pauses in fighting along one of the main roads into Gaza to allow aid into the besieged Palestinian enclave. Benjamin Netanyahu's comments come after the plan was met with fierce opposition within his own government. The war has now entered its 9th month, with the death toll in Gaza now exceeding 37,000.
80 countries attending a Ukraine peace summit in Switzerland have used the final communique to commit to Ukraine's territorial integrity. They urged dialogue, the return of all prisoners by both sides, and for Russia, which wasn't invited to the conference, to return Ukrainian children it's taken. Most nations attending the conference backed the statement, but several countries, including India, South Africa and Saudi Arabia, didn't sign it.
Australians saved $432 million last financial year and diverted 50,000 tonnes of goods from landfill by shopping second-hand. That's according to a new report out today. The New South Wales EPA and Charitable Reuse Australia used data from 44 organisations representing 600 thrift shops and social enterprises.
The world's oldest surviving clipper ship, the City of Adelaide, has been given a permanent home in Port Adelaide. The 160-year-old ship has been moved from a floating barge where it sat for the last 10 years. Nearly 250,000 Australians can trace their ancestry back to the passenger-carrying ship.
And photos of legendary Australian singer John Farnham have been shared publicly for the first time since he underwent surgery for oral cancer. The 74-year-old can be seen in these photos at the February wedding of his son Rob. John Farnham had a tumour removed from his mouth in August 2022. Doctors gave him the all clear a year after the marathon 12 hours surgery. Isn't it great, Bridge, to see?
Yeah, fantastic. He's looking great and celebrating a lovely family occasion there.